Well, good evening and welcome to this WQE Success at Sixth event. So for parents and carers of students who are new to the college. So my name's Andrew Jackson and I'm going to be hosting the event and sort of handing on to other people. We've got with us Paul Wilson, who is our principal, and our three heads of studies, David Morgan, Howard Patel, and Rakesh Nike.
Thank you, Andrew. Hello to everybody. A very warm welcome from all of us at WQE. I'm Paul Wilson. I'm the principal, as Andrew's just explained. We're really delighted that we've got so many of you being able to join us this evening. It's up into the hundreds now, so that's fantastic. And WQE is a very, very special place. I would say that as the principal, but I hope by the time you finish this evening, you'll have some sense of why that is, and I'm sure that's part of the reason you chose WQE as the place for the next few years for your sons and daughters, and we take that very, very seriously. We take for granted that we're really good at getting results for young people and working with them to develop themselves in preparation for what are external public assessments and exams. We also work incredibly hard alongside that on really important parts of personal development and preparation for your sons and daughters to take their next steps. And you'll hear more about that from some of my colleagues, I'm sure, later on in the presentations. But ultimately, our mission is to prepare them as young professionals for their next steps, potentially in their professional careers, be that through a university progression pathway or through higher level apprenticeships and into the workplace. And we take that part of our work really, really seriously. As I've said, we take for granted we'll get great results for your sons and daughters if everybody works with us and goes through this process with us. That should be a given, and we take that for granted. It's the other aspects which are so important. When I did the induction presentations to your sons and daughters in the first few days, this is a slide I particularly referenced because it sums up what it's really about to be a member of WQE. As I've just explained, we're preparing them for their next steps in the world as professionals, potentially in the future. Our alumni have some really fantastic careers that they can come back and talk to your sons and daughters about at various points in their journey, and we very much embrace that. And it's about getting them ready for those stages. In addition to making sure that they've got the academic qualifications to make the progressions that they need. So I talked to them about the community that WQ is. We're a really large college. We've got over 3,800 students that study with us, and that brings with it an enormous range of resources, facilities, the ability to specialise in just what they want to do, to mix and combine programmes and courses in the right way for their progression pathways. But it also brings with it a massive opportunity to be part of a really diverse community of young people. And one of the most important things that our leavers frequently say to us is, yes, they got great qualifications and yes, they were supported off into their progression. But in roughly a couple of years from now, your sons and daughters are likely to be progressing on to those things, potentially into higher education, potentially moving away from home and studying in a different city, and potentially in an even larger organisation, but possibly even 5-10 times the size of WQE. And we take really seriously the role we have in preparing them for that. They're going to be part of a broad and diverse community. They have the opportunity to find people just like themselves in that community. They can find specialist interest groups. They can do enrichment activities with people that want to do the things that they want to do. They'll spend a lot of their time in quite a small community of people. They'll have fewer relationships with teachers than they've been used to at school. Those teachers will spend a much larger part of their week working with your sons and daughters and getting to know them really, really well. And I know for a fact they've really enjoyed the first few weeks getting to know everybody. And hopefully that's been the experience of your sons and daughters as well. So those relationships in those teaching groups are with people that have chosen the same things. They've probably got very similar career aspirations, So already what's happening in our very large community is they will have found people that have got the same interests, and begin to form relationships with those people and begin to take their journey through the planning processes for next steps. And all that's alongside lots of specialist support. So we, for example, have Student Medic Society, so students that want to be medical professionals and doctors, they form groups together and work with university undergraduate medics, and talk about those processes. And likewise for many of the other careers, we've got a motorsports society for engineers and things like that. So there's loads of opportunity for your sons and daughters to find the people that have a passion for the things that they've got a passion for. And that's one of the great strengths of being in a large organisation, but it also in many respects, because of that, can feel quite intimate and quite small. And sometimes that takes a week or two, and sometimes a month or two to really embed. But our students who leave us and talk about that with a real passion. So that's a big part of what it's like to be part of the WQ community. No principal would be talking to students in any other way than to say we're going to challenge them, and I explained to them we make absolutely no apology for the level of challenge that they're going to experience. We don't get great results without pushing really hard and pushing the boundaries of where people are comfortable in taking their academic development and their thinking and their work in those classes. So that will happen. And you can take that for granted. And sometimes, as I say, that will feel uncomfortable and we need your support with that. We'll stretch them. They'll come home really challenged on occasions, and some, the level of work that they're doing will be well beyond perhaps what they've done before. And that can feel hard, and they'll need all of the supportive adults around them to help that process. And again, my colleagues will probably talk a little bit more about that later on. They need to be completely committed. I talked to them about commitment. They won't succeed at the levels that they want without real commitment. Being where they need to be, when they need to be there, being prepared to go the extra mile and do additional work in their own time. And to be really thinking at a very early stage about where they want to head next. One of the really significant aspects of joining a sixth form college is the journey to the next stage is a really short one. And we need to get them thinking quite quickly about how they prepare for those next steps. And many of them might not know what those next steps are yet. So they need to be really committed to that research and thinking and talking to you, talking to employers and businesses, and talking to our careers teams about those potential avenues to become the professionals of the future, and potentially heading off to great jobs and into universities. So that commitment, that challenge go hand in hand, and students have really got to start from day one. I'll say a little bit more about that in just a moment. Curiosity is something you would expect of a learning organisation like a large college as WQE is. But when we talk about curiosity, we talk about an awful lot more than just the academic curiosity. To some extent, we take that part for granted, that your sons and daughters have chosen what they're passionate about, what they want to study. They've hopefully done some thinking about the pathway that will take them, and have been curious about what those careers might involve. And if they haven't, we'll certainly be helping with that process. But we want them to be curious about the world out there, the world that they're going to be part of. They're going to be part of a very broad, diverse community. There'll be the employers of the future. There'll be the leaders of the future. They'll probably, many of them, run their own businesses in the future. They may be civil servants and public servants in the future, and we want them to be curious about what's involved in those things, and to be aware of the world and getting ready for that. And it's a big part of things beyond the curriculum, that they're beginning to take responsibility and curious about what a difference they might make in the world in the future, either for themselves or in society. So we'll be encouraging that every step of the way. And finally, I talked to them about consideration. We don't have an enormous, great big list of rules and operate in the same way necessarily as a school would do, but we do ask every student to be considerate of each other and give consideration to the impact they're having, both upon the people immediately around classes, in their corridors when they're travelling to and from the college, but actually the consideration to the way they make a difference in the community more widely than that. We share a campus with a fabulous university, and we've got facilities either side of Leicester University, and our students interact with undergraduates all of the time. They travel between our sites. It's a very inspiring area to be studying in, but we want people to be considerate of that and be mindful that brings all sorts of responsibilities. We want them to consider what difference they might make more widely in the community. Do they want to be involved in charity work experience? Do they want to make a difference in Leicester, or do they want to make a difference one day in the rest of the world more widely again? And they might not know what they can achieve at the moment, and certainly we hear the stories of students that have gone on and achieved some absolutely wonderful things, and one of our jobs is to help them consider what real difference they might make and how they might make that difference in the future. And in many ways this stage is about preparing and getting the skills and getting the passion and the ambition to go and do things in their future. So we want to give consideration to that as well. So as I've described, hopefully you've got a sense of it's a very different place and very different phase of learning. They're not school children in our eyes anymore. They're young adults. They're preparing, as I've mentioned, to be young professionals. We need them to start taking the opportunities and beginning to develop their own personal responsibility for their next stage. In many ways, in 2 years' time, as I've described, in a different city, potentially in a very large organisation, without necessarily the same sorts of infrastructure for support and structures that you would experience in a college setting. So we're getting them ready for that level of independence, and it's a very important part of their development. An academic year is just 37 weeks long. And so when you start counting it in weeks, and we've had nearly 2 weeks of that soon, we realise that there's a lot to do. If you're trying to cram in all of the academic work and trying to do all of that personal development, basically about a year from now, preparing to write university applications if that's the direction they want to take, it's a very short phase. And one of the most important messages I would give anybody is waste not a minute to get started. You need to support them to really get into good habits from the very beginning, and to not miss a moment either in their learning or in those wider opportunities that the college offers them. It is that stepping stone, as I've described, into the next stage, and it comes very, very quickly. So that independence that we're nurturing, we need your support with, and part of that process is beginning to let go a little bit and let them test that independence, and we won't always get it right. One of our jobs as college professionals, and your jobs as parents and carers, is to be ready to catch them in a safe way and guide them back into the right way when they experiment with taking that independent responsibility, and it doesn't necessarily always work. And that's a big part of the learning and a really important part of their learning. So that's what we'll be trying to do in partnership with you. It comes with freedoms, it comes with choices, responsibilities, and the vast majority of students get that right the vast majority of the time. But I'd be lying if I said that students don't always get that right, and that's really healthy actually. We should view that in a very healthy way, because it's part of learning to get it right, and we're really good at helping them make that step very quickly back to get things right as well, in terms of the way they're preparing and learning. So it is different. They're part of a really exciting group of students, as I've said, about 3,800 students, like-minded, similar choices that they've chosen with similar passions to them, and it's a really vibrant place for them to be, with huge amounts of opportunities both in the academic sense and that wider sense that I've just described. And it's so important that we're working together with you as parents and carers to help them see those opportunities. I told them in my presentations to them to get their heads up, get their eyes open, because those opportunities are everywhere, and they're very easily missed if they don't get their heads up and look for them and take part in them, and perhaps have that little bit of bravery and that little bit of confidence to put themselves out there and go and meet somebody new, or try something different, or join a different enrichment or group or student-led society. So we need to encourage that, and we need your help to do that as well. We've got lots of commitments to your sons and daughters. I've given the first of those commitments. We're absolutely committed for them getting the best possible results, and we know our staff produce fantastic outcomes for their students year on year, and so we're committed to making sure that the learning and the teaching is really high quality, and that we're giving lots of feedback, lots of assessment, encouraging them, supporting them through that journey that I've just described, and really importantly, whilst I've described we're very large, we're committed to it being a really safe and positive and structured environment, and that's particularly important as we're trying to encourage that level of independence. Hopefully they're considering how they're acting in that, and they're taking responsibility in that, and they're playing a big part in that community and making it the college that they want it to be, because ultimately that will be their experience, and we know they've made a fantastic start in the first couple of days and weeks. So it's really been a good start for them, and we're going to continue in that direction. I've talked a lot about planning progression. I'm sure my colleagues will be thinking about describing some of the steps we take for that later on, so I won't dwell on that. But as I've described, really important that they're thinking early. It's pretty normal for a young person to not have a clear view about where they might head 2 years from now. Lots of them will have, lots of them won't have, and our job is to work through that process with them, and help them use those wider education opportunities and personal development opportunities to get the skills and the things that go with the CVs, and help them in the interviews in readiness for those steps when they come along. And many of those things can be done in a very generic way, and prove invaluable later. So ultimately, we're committed to massively high expectations, and as I've described, no lack of challenge. We'll be really positive in that challenge, but we'll push them very, very hard. So I've already described we don't have a huge list of rules, and expectations are pretty clear and simple in the college. Do their best, be considerate of everybody else. Think about those C's that describe the culture of the college, that commitment, always looking to take on a challenge and to work through a challenge, never ducking those challenges or hiding from them, are important things. But ultimately, we know that the single most important driver of their performance in college, and the part that will help us help them, is being there at everything, on time, in the right place, with the right frame of mind, ready to be actively engaged, ready to take part. Classes are much smaller in a sixth form college, so they'll be able, I think, to be confident about taking part, and they'll get to know the students in their classes very well over a relatively short time, and so hopefully they'll be really engaged in that and ready to play their part. One of the things students who are absent often say is, yeah, don't worry, I'll catch up, I'll copy up. And this is a very different phase of learning. A lot of the learning that takes place in a sixth form college is discursive. They'll be in groups, they'll be discussing things, they'll be challenging each other's assumptions, they'll be questioning each other, they'll be exploring concepts together, and you can't write that down. If you could do that, we'd just hand them a textbook at the beginning of the year and say, see you at the exam, and it doesn't work like that. The level of learning, the skills that are required to answer exam questions are at a level now where they have to be there. They've got to have taken part in those types of activities, and been part of those teams in classes to really get to the level of understanding and depth to get the best grades they possibly can. So that's a core expectation, really. We want them obviously to be committed. I've described that earlier, to be organised, to do things beyond their class. My colleagues undoubtedly will mention this later as well, to spend time beyond their lessons. We talk about needing to do 5 hours a week per subject. So that's 15 to 20 hours actually in addition to their core timetable. And there are structured ways of doing that within the college, and they don't necessarily have to do all of that at home. But I would be very sceptical if your sons or daughters are saying, "Don't worry, I've done everything at college." There'll be things to do at home, and it's worth having those conversations with them about the balance they're striking between work at college, and the important bit of developing and meeting other people, yes, but balancing that with work as well, and doing some at home, some at college, in addition to their classes. And I've already described really the importance of thinking about others, the consideration that we want them to have on others and their impact, and consideration about the future that they want and the difference that they want to make, both in the college, beyond the college, and in their futures are the really important things that we would expect of them. So hopefully you've got a sense from what I've been describing that we can't do this alone. One of the reasons we hold an evening like this is because we need your help. We need your help to step away at the right times and to step in at the right times, put them at the heart. And the relationship is quite different. When we talk about things with young people, they're the centre of that discussion. It's their discussion. The staff and the parents, carers are there to support them in that journey, and we'll steer that, and we'll hopefully use your support and work in partnership with you. But it's about them, and they've got to own the decisions that they take going forward, and they've got to take responsibility for those, and they've got to work that process through in collaboration. What we do expect them to do is collaborate with you. This is not a stepping away from school, therefore parent carers not involved anymore. We're really clear that you are. And that's why we do an evening like this. It's why at the end of this presentation, I'm going to share contact information so that you can be involved. But please be mindful that when you get involved, we like you to put them at the centre of it, really, rather than go round them, and we'll do the same. So when we talk to them, we'll try and communicate in ways that they share that information with you, and you'll have opportunity to explore details of what their timetable is, their attendance information. You'll be able to get feeds from us in relation to some of those things as well. So we'll share important information, but always trying to get them to take greater independence and greater ownership in that process, and that's the balance we try and strike with you. It is a really vital role, and because time is short, there isn't much time when they make mistakes or when they get it wrong for us to get involved quite quickly as parents, carers and staff at the college. So that's what we endeavour to do. So student life, I've talked about all of those opportunities of being part of a really vibrant sixth form college, like-minded people, with large-scale facilities and opportunities to specialise in the things they want to do. And that's all the opportunity for them to grow and to gain the sorts of skills and the sorts of experiences, and to test themselves for that future world that I was describing earlier on in my presentation today. We want them to take a lead. We want them to take responsibility. I've described that they'll be the future employers, the future leaders, and the future civil servants and public servants, who hopefully will lead in society rather than just follow around in society. So hopefully they'll take the opportunities through enrichments, through trips, through the wider activities that the college offers. They can set up their own student-led societies. There's nothing to stop them setting up the societies that they want to set up and finding the people that want to join those activities and societies with them. We go part way to helping that. There are already many established, but we want them to take a lead. We encourage them to take a leadership role across the college through things like the student council and the executive as well. So they can do that in many, many different ways. They can represent the college in sport. They can be part of productions and performances with all the teamwork and leadership that goes with that. And they need to be aware as well that there's lots of academic support. There's lots of things, not just their independent study beyond their lessons, but they need to lead when they need help. Again, I've described that there isn't much time, so when they find things difficult, they need to ask early. They need to go and find the support groups that are available for that. They sometimes might need to get some specialist help in terms of overcoming a difficulty that they have, and we need them to do that quite quickly. So if they're talking to you about those things, encourage them to find help beyond just trying to fix things themselves, and there's plenty there, as I'm sure my colleagues will describe later. So I'm beginning to draw to a close now, and I'll hand over to my colleagues in just a moment. But before I do, I just wanted to share that there are people you can contact as part of that partnership. So contacting the college is a relatively straightforward process. They all have a personal progress mentor, a PPM. That person doesn't teach. They're available throughout the working week. They run various one-to-one sessions, group sessions, but they're available to you. If you need to talk to them about anything, you can contact them. Email is a relatively straightforward process for that. You can contact the college and ask for their PPM. If you don't know who it is, then reception should be able to help you, but it's a good idea to ask them pretty early in this process, who is your PPM, what's their name and what's their email address, because that's your route to being able to intervene and come and support the process if you think there's things that we need to be aware of, and to get involved. So use the PPM process for that. But we've also got a team of heads of studies who are here tonight, so I won't say much more about them because I'm sure they'll speak for themselves later, Rakesh, Howard and David. And for more urgent things, if something urgent happens, if you're concerned about safety or welfare, or something that's more complex, then we've got our executive team. There's myself and 5 others who are on this slide, and you'll have this information shared later anyway, but you can contact any of us, typically through the main reception, if you've got a more pressing and urgent need that perhaps we need to be aware of, that can't be dealt with by the PPMs or the heads of studies. So there's lots of route into getting support at the college. We've got really high ambitions for your sons and daughters. Hopefully I've described that to you. Our history shows that comes true. If all of the things I've described are things that your sons and daughters embrace, that they're committed, they accept the challenges that we place their way, they play a full part in the community that is WQE, and they work with us in the ways that I've described, they'll be incredibly successful, not just now, but hopefully in their careers as young professionals working through. We need them and want them to grow and flourish, and the greatest privilege a principal has in a role like mine is to see that process on a daily basis, and it really does happen. Even though that time is short, it happens incredibly quickly, and we see them grow and flourish into young adults and ready to be young professionals taking their next steps. And that's probably the greatest privilege I have. So on that note, I just want to say we're going to enjoy, I hope, working with you on that process and sharing that with you, because you'll see that development as well over the coming weeks, months and couple of years that they're with us, I'm sure. So please get in touch if you need our support or help at any stage, and I'm going to hand over to my colleagues, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to hand over to our heads of studies in a few moments' time. I'm going to try and do the very exciting job of speaking and clicking things at the same time, which I may fail to do. So Paul mentioned our heads of studies. Basically, we've got a team of about 30 PPMs, our personal progress mentors, and they're split into 3 sub-teams. And each of those sub-teams has a deputy head of studies and then a head of studies who's here this evening. And so they're going to be key people in your in the students' lives in their time with us. And I'm delighted that they're here with us this evening to share some information about the sort of mindset that we encourage in students as they are with us. So without further ado, I will hand across to whichever one of them is starting.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Rakesh Nike. Thank you very much for the warm welcome, Andrew, much appreciated. So on behalf of the other heads of studies, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for joining us. It's really appreciated. I hope that your son and daughter have now settled into life at WQE very well. What we want to do today is introduce you really to some of the work that we do in the first term, specifically around developing a growth mindset. Now, some of you may have come across this concept before, but essentially it's about building positive attitudes to learning, and more about that in a minute. What we want to do is really work from an evidence base and work with students to help them think about what might come before it actually happens, essentially trying to get them to anticipate changes. And this is about getting students to be prepared for the ebb and flow of work, planned and unplanned, and making sure that they go about, anticipating changes and planning for this. So essentially, that's what the growth mindset is. Paul Wilson's talked about this quite extensively already, the transition from school to college in quite a lot of detail, and how it can impact on a young person. And in most cases, people value that change and adapt very, very well indeed. Students like the semi-independence of a college setup, the facilities Mr. Wilson's talked about, but probably the most important thing that students value is their ability to really narrow down their courses, giving them the ability to study courses that they're passionate about and courses that line up with their career aspirations. So essentially, that's the key positive students working with us at WQE College. One of the things that we ask students to do is to sketch themselves a graph a bit like this, and this graph really tracks their emotional highs and lows, and it really identifies the sort of typical year and the emotions within that typical year, and throughout the year we suggest to them that it might look something like this. Now, some of you may have come across this before. It's called the change curve, and it helps you to understand the stages of personal transition. And you may have come across this in different spheres. It's used in all sorts of different business models, and it's about change. And students are experiencing very, very significant change. The move from school to college it shouldn't be underestimated. So let's start with the beginning here. We've got shock. There's a shock to the system often, in the first few weeks of term, waking up early, traveling by train or bus, getting homework, the demands of an A-level program if they are on an A-level program, and simply sometimes having to do work more independently. and not being spoon-fed. That's often a shock for lots of students. And the list can go on. But as you can see from this graph, it is short-term. Most students do move on from this state fairly quickly and move on and just get on with it, like we've said at the end of the scale here. They just get on with it. What the change curve does show us, that it's not all going to be, plain sailing. There will be emotional highs and lows. And you can see you've also got that emotional fog component there. Sometimes it's called the trough of despair. And we accept that. It's a genuine emotion. People can feel like that. But again, it's short-lived, and with the right support from yourself and ourselves, we can help students overcome that. And some of you as parents will recognize perhaps these emotions at home as well. So let's have a closer look at some of these emotions. Let's dive into some of these. Rejection. You've seen the quote, "I don't believe what you're telling me about A-level study. It doesn't seem any different." Now, we often get students in the very early stages who are not willing to take any advice at all. They know everything there is to know about the world, and they don't require any help from anybody and reject any advice given to them. Now, I can't see your faces, parents, but I bet you there's a lot of people here. You're nodding away thinking, I recognize that. I recognize that. And then you've got students that, they're in denial. I'm fine. I'm absolutely okay. I'm all right. And so they don't reject things, but they deny everything. They deny that they might be struggling perhaps, and perhaps deny that they might need help. And for them, everything is fine. And they just want to be left alone. And again, some of you will recognize these traits. And then you have students that are simply angered by the whole process. They get cross with everything linked to college, the staff, the courses. It's all wrong. I just hate it. And here it could get tricky, couldn't it? But we've got staff that are well prepared for these emotions. We recognize that this is very much an accepted emotion. And as we've demonstrated in the graph previously, it's one that is short-lived, and we're here to support you on that. And then you have students that often blame themselves. Another very typical emotion, and the concept of self-blame we see often. I'm not clever enough is something that we see often. I can't do this. And our response would be that, well, we wouldn't be placing you on this course if we didn't think that you could do this. We've got a very, very rigorous enrollment and induction system. We've got a very important process there. We would help and support the student, reassure them, do whatever we can to support. Now, Mr. Wilson's already talked about the extensive support facilities. We would mobilize that support, whether it's through the PPM, the member of staff, the teaching member of staff, or indeed any one of our other support services. And then you have students that are, anxious. Feeling anxious is not something new. We all go through that very, very typical emotional reaction, and it's a very acceptable response to change. And as we say to students all the time, it's okay to be anxious. Think about when you as parents were anxious. Perhaps you had a recent promotion or you've changed jobs. We've all felt like this at times. Feeling anxious is okay. Where it might not be okay is where the anxiousness or the anxiety starts to change the day-to-day routine of your son or daughter, where things don't seem quite right, their lifestyle changes. There, we may want to add a bit more specialist support through our welfare and skills department. And again, we would do our best to overcome these challenges. And in those cases, of course, we would contact you and we'd want to work with you on how best we can support your child. And then you have students that are right at that bottom of that change curve, right at the bottom, that trough of despair that we call, wants to give up on the courses. Again, these are short-lived experiences, and we all go through them at some point in our lives. Now, hopefully, having talked through these range of emotions and experiences that a typical student is like to feel, that you're in a better position at least to spot them and in turn pick up the phone and talk to us and let us know if they're going through those changes. We will support you with that and do our best to support your child. Let's look at perhaps how we might go about responding to some of these questions that you might get, how we might support this kind of thinking that might be negative. And often we call it a fixed state. You might have heard that before. So we've got a student that says, well, everyone else is better than me. Everyone's better than me. So this is a fixed mindset. Students using generalized language about what they can't do and what they can do. Often the language is emotionally charged and in some cases quite extreme. So everyone's better than me. So how might we respond? Well, that's unlikely, as we say. What makes you feel like that? What are the 3 things that you can do to improve the next piece of work? Again, a practical response, getting students to think about that in bite-sized chunks. And being specific is the key here. I'm really rubbish at this. Our response might be, well, you're not good at it yet, but what steps do you need to take to improve that? Again, break that question down or the statement down. Ask them, what is it that you need to do to improve? What is it that you need to do to help yourself? No one else is doing 5 hours of work. Again, this is that whole denial change. Think about the emotional graph change that we talked about earlier. Encourage students perhaps to talk to second-year students, and they will very, very quickly confirm and reinforce the idea of independent study. And Mr. Wilson's already talked about that, the minimum hours of study that's required for any student to be successful. And then, this is my favorite, I'll revise nearer the exams, because you know what? That's what I did for my GCSEs, and I haven't done too badly. I've done pretty well. Generally, and you may laugh, it's not a good idea. It's not a good idea, is it? Drip feeding that information, getting on top of that work, making sure that you practice is really quite important. And as I've said before, maybe some students would have gotten away with that with their respective GCSEs. But in our experience, certainly at level 3, that is not likely to be the case. So please do encourage your son and daughter to keep on top of that work. Drip feed is the key. So continuing with getting students to think about refocusing. Too much work? Well, we might respond by saying, have you got a calendar? Are you organised? Mr. Wilson talked about this extensively again. How are you recording your homework? Are you planning your time in the evening? Are you doing extra work outside of your respective lessons? No one told me there wasn't any homework. Well, your teacher would have told you that you've got homework. The other students in the class would know whether they've got homework or not. Also, making sure that students are checking their calendar, checking their email on a very regular basis, including the use of MS Teams. Often we get it's boring, it's too hard, it's not what I expected. Again, really simple. Speak to staff, speak to our teachers, speak to our PPMs. We will help you overcome these challenges. We often have students say, I don't know how to revise. I've been lucky with my GCSEs. I've done pretty well, but actually it was all a bit last minute. And I just reread my notes because that's all I knew what to do. And actually, I've done pretty well. Well, yes, you might have got away with it with GCSEs, but certainly wouldn't at doing A-levels at WQE, for example. So here, we'd encourage your son and daughter to talk to their PPMs, talk to their teachers, making sure that they attend their group sessions with their PPMs. And we also have specialist support that can help your child plan their work help them with revision techniques, for example, all sorts of wonderful different things, including mind maps, etc. So please encourage them to speak to someone. I'm just seeing how well I do without effort before I really try. Well, this is quite funny. And I'm probably going to be honest with you that I probably would have said this myself many, many years ago. And I'd probably say, well, good luck with that, because that's really not the reality. And, you know, maybe every 5, maybe every 10 years, we might have the odd genius who would get away with not doing much at all outside of those lessons. But I have to say, they are really few and far between. Almost all students would never get away with that strategy. Putting effort in and working through that problem is the key. And actually, we've got to think about it from the point of view of why they are learning the new subjects that they are. They need to be enjoyable. Working through their notes, reading, rereading, trying to piece these different strands together can be enjoyable. Think about that light bulb moment that we expect our students to have. Really important and actually intellectually nourishing for so many and gratifying. So we encourage students not to think about putting effort in. They need to make sure they put as much effort in as possible. Now, Mr. Wilson has also talked about this. The key to being a good student at WQE is making sure that all students use the student email system that we've got. It's the most important way of communicating with our staff and students. As we've described, we're a large college on 2 campuses. Email is the key. If students are having a challenge with their ICT or their equipment, we've got a very big ICT support team that are more than ready and willing to help. So please make sure that students are receiving these emails and actually using them for their own work and keeping top of the emails. Think about your own work. What would happen if you didn't keep on top of your emails at work? And that's what we've got to instill in your sons and daughters' minds. Digital display, we've talked about. I'm not going to read everything out. Lots of ways that we can communicate with students. Students need to be using the College VLE, the virtual learning environment, as we call it. At WQE, we call it WQE Online. It's a very important source of information, communication. Again, encourage your son and daughter to look at these on a very regular basis. And lastly, linked to the idea of independence, we'll be signposting students to all sorts of help, enrichment opportunities, volunteering. Students will need to find out rather than be told and spoon-fed, and that's another big difference. So we want our students to become independent, rather than become dependent. We want our relationship to enable them to make the changes rather than disable them by spoon feeding and having too much scaffolding around them. So that's probably all from me for now. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Howard Patel, who's going to talk to you about engaging with you more specifically. So thank you very much again. If you've got any questions, please put them in the chat, and I look forward to seeing you very soon. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name's Howard Patel. I'm one of the other heads of studies. Just to focus on your role as parent and carers, most of what we're going to cover, you'll be very aware of, but what we want to look at is what we know works and the ways in which we want to work with you. And as Paul's mentioned, that we really value your input and we want you to work alongside us and really be part of that WQE community. It may feel that as we try and put the student in the centre of what's happening, that parents and carers, you may feel a little bit further removed than you would have done at school. Now, our thought process around this is that particularly for students who are going on to higher education, and quite often in 2 years' time, when they join universities, and university will do everything through the student. And what we're trying to do is to make that transition gently, slowly, and by keeping you involved, but also trying to keep the student in the centre of all of our communication and really prepare them for the next steps of their journey, and whether that's higher education, apprenticeships, or employment. We have an online system called Pro Portal. where students can check their attendance levels. They can check on the grades that their teachers are giving them for different pieces of work, submissions, and you can see again the breakdown of unit information for each subject that they're doing. And what we'd really encourage you to do is to sit down with your child and look at that information and really talk through some of that data that's on there. And again, like we've mentioned, if you have any questions regarding that, please make contact with the Personal Progress Mentor. PPM, Personal Progress Mentor, really key point of contact for the student and for you. And as Paul's mentioned as well, by contacting them by email or phone will be the best point of way of contacting them. And if you're not sure who your child's PPM is, if you ask to look at their timetable, and that may be on Pro Portal or a paper copy, you should be able to see that at the top of their timetable, and you can check it on there. There's also a parent carer section of the website. And again, we put out information on there. There's a parent carer guide, and you can see that Andrew's also put a link to that on the Q&A. And there's various different communications that is put on there and updated as the year progresses. It's also worth noting that we recently introduced a new efficient way of communicating student attendance. So if the student is away from college without letting us know, and if that may be the whole day or for part of the day, what we'll do is we'll be in touch with them and with parents towards the end of the day by text message and email to let them know that's happened. That's to ensure that you're aware that your son or daughter did not attend college on that day. And also what we don't want is to get into a situation where students are missing lessons and without letting us know and without us letting you know as well. Another exercise that we do with students is one, and I'll just cover this briefly. I mean, you've got 8 real WQE students all starting maths last September, and they all got a grade 8 in maths. And again, a decent GCSE grade profile. And what we'd say to students, and we'll continue to say this to them, is that your grade is not a done deal, and you've got a really big influence on the grade that you'll get. And again, if you take a really steady and relaxed approach, it may be that you end up going down slightly, and we'll touch on that in terms of independent study. But the aim and aspiration for us, for all of our students, for them to be those who really put the effort in and get up towards the top end of achieving those grades and really challenge themselves. And what we really mentioned to them right from the start of orientation and throughout PPM and through their lessons is that really hit the ground running, get into good practices from the start and take all the opportunities that are around them. And that will really help them to get towards the top of that grade range. I'm not going to talk through all of the examples on here, but what we do is talk to students about some of the things that they can change and some of the things that they can't. And I mean, just to touch on one of the examples that we can see on here, factors that can't be changed, the distance of the commute to the college. I mean, things that can be influenced is the number of hours that they're studying outside or the way that they're organising their lesson content and their material. So what we'll do, we run through some of these different situations with them, and depending on the student's individual situation, the PPM will then have those bespoke conversations with them. Keeping track. We have something called minimum expected grades, and what we do is based on the student's GCSE grade profile, and we see what they would get for a particular subject. We look at an average and we add half a grade because what we want to do is set an aspirational target for them. Then regularly throughout the year, we have something called progress point data, where we collect grades and information from teaching staff, and we use that to see if a student is on track to get the grades by the end of the course. We also attach a small summary, and in addition to that, our personal progress mentors also have regular one-to-one meetings with students where they actually discuss that data, see where students are, whether they're on track to achieve their MEG grades. If they are, again, give them higher aspirations and tell them to maintain what they're doing. And if they're not, look at additional support that they can access, what changes and improvements can be made, and what is the best solution for that particular student, because again, we appreciate that will differ for each individual student. To sum up this slide, and again, this may be something that a lot of you will be familiar with, The idea of a growth mindset is not to be stuck where you are and not to think everything is predetermined, it's a done deal, but that as a student, they've got a really big impact on what happens and that they're in control of their learning. And we really want to foster the idea that they can change and grow and really develop. And often a lot of the things that they start to tell us at this time of the year, I mean, at the end of the 2 years with us, they are all the things that they've achieved and so much more as well. And it's about really developing them as an individual, just go off and do that on their own. We're doing that in partnership with them, and they're part of a community that's really supporting them with that. Again, this is something that we discuss very often with our students, and we use as a discussion point. And we always ask students that, how much time are you going to spend outside of lessons? And we ask them what they think is a reasonable amount of time. And what we look at on this next slide is a graph that shows you on average, our students are sort of between 9 and 15 hours of study, but what we'd really expect is at least 4 to 5 hours minimum per subject outside of class every week. And that would be a really good benchmark for students to start to get into really good habits with. And that will include homework that's been set by subject teachers. It could be reviewing the work that they've covered during those particular lessons, or even looking ahead at some of the content, reading ahead. And again, the teacher will be providing them with reading lists as well, and again, preparing them for those next steps in higher education. We have a slight joke with students that if you could pay for your grades, how much would you pay? And we, of course, we plainly don't take any bribes, but there's a currency, and that currency is their time. And we, again, as my colleagues have mentioned as well, we really emphasize the importance of them dedicating their time to their studies. And the more time they're put in, the greater the rewards that will come out for the students at the end. And that will something that we'll continue to reiterate to them, to the PPMs, the teaching staff, and just the wider staff body as well. That brings me to the end, and I'll pass on to my colleague, David Morgan.
Okay, good evening. I'm David Morgan, the third head of studies, and I'm just going to kind of bring the presentation to a close, really, by talking about a few sort of final key things that we do with the students, and really building on what both Rakesh and Hao have discussed here. And one of the key things that we do with students is we look at organisation, and part of that is the sort of bag you might bring to college. So we've got a series of 3 images here. So I'll ask Andrew to put the first image. So we have students turning up with the bare minimum, the smallest bag as possible. Often it's fashion over practicality. So some students turning up to college and they've got a tiny bag. They can fit a pen and maybe their mobile phone in it. And then the next image. Yep. So we've got students essentially using their bag as a filing system. So they just shove everything into the bag and then tip it out onto the floor and say, oh, right, I need that and I need that. And it's not particularly effective. And then the final possible option is that perhaps some students might bring everything into college every single day. And fundamentally, that's perhaps not practical. So we wouldn't recommend any of these approaches towards organisation. So there may be better ways. So a secret weapon, yes, possibly. So what we encourage students to do is that students perhaps bring one folder into college with their current work, and potentially that's divided into sections for their different subjects. And then when they get home, they can then transfer that information from those different sections for maybe their 3 subjects, whatever they're doing, into folders at home. And then obviously that builds up a file per subject, and they can have then subfiles for perhaps different topics or units, etc. It's fairly self-explanatory. As we say, they don't need to bring everything in. We also encourage the use of OneNote, and lots of students use OneNote, and the way to say it is a digital filing system. So we've got a nice example from Andrew Jackson here. Here's what a OneNote might look like in terms of different sections, and that could be done for or created for the different subjects, and again, different topics. What's really nice is that you can drag and drop documents that the students might receive from teachers. If they make notes in a lesson, then they can take a photo of their notes and again upload it to OneNote. This is, we find this is particularly effective for students who perhaps have the shove everything in a bag approach, actually. So it's a nice, effective way, and again, using the technologies that many students are increasingly comfortable with, and we can support that. So fundamentally, we encourage good organizational habits, good study habits. What we encourage really is right from the start, students setting aside some time, perhaps one evening every week, and they perhaps organize their WQE life, and perhaps early on, and we encourage parents to be involved in this, and you'll know your young people better than we do, but maybe rather than students doing that in their bedrooms, they could sit at the kitchen table, and once a week they work through the notes they've created, and then transfer it to the files. So it's a good kind of sorting activity. Again, parents perhaps engaging with that, parents being involved in that. We also encourage students to set up maybe a calendar app, using a diary, creating or using that for recording their deadlines, the work they've been set, and perhaps getting notifications pinging to their phone, so they can hear it, and again it just supports that organization, and again it sets up the start of the year, and particularly in relation to what Hal was talking about. It is very busy, 5 hours expected per subject per week, so fitting in that organizational element is really important. And of course we have students, and most students in fact, they are still paper-based in many ways, so they'll arrive at college with a pad of paper, and they'll make notes for their 3 lessons or 3 subjects during the course of the day, but of course there might be 1 page for biology, the following page is for sociology, then the 3rd page might be for psychology. So again, we encourage them to get home and then separate those notes, put them in those files. Otherwise, that pad of paper becomes something perhaps not as manageable as perhaps we would hope. One of the big pieces of work we do with students through the pastoral system and the PPMs, and obviously extending beyond that, is work around progression, and a lot of planning for progression, and that starts very early. So every year we have students who have concrete plans. They arrive to college and they feel they know what they want to do. So I want to be a doctor, a lawyer, and an accountant. They're 3 of the most popular ones, and as I'm sure you can imagine. But the majority of students don't know what they want to do after college, and of course that's fine. So right from the start, we will be talking to them about what they enjoy, what their interests are, what possibilities there are, what opportunities there are for them. We have a really great careers team who will provide that support, and in addition, that careers team is supported by the PPM team, who have a lot of expertise in progression, supporting students with those next steps, and we'll be starting that work in the first term through the PPM sessions. So essentially what we're saying is, and saying to the students is, you don't need to know exactly what you want to do yet, but if you work hard, get to grips with your subjects, and you're doing well, then things will gradually work themselves out in that regard, particularly with the amount of support that we've got in place and we will put in place over the coming couple of years. So in terms of progression, And I'm just going to give a very brief overview here. As one can imagine, with a college, sixth form college, we have very good progression to higher education. So between 70 and 80% of our students at level 3 will progress to higher education. In addition, we've got lots of students who will move on to further education, usually to do in the arts, to do sort of foundation degrees, building up that portfolio, and then moving on to universities and art colleges. There's probably an equal split in terms of students who move on to employment and apprenticeships, and what we're seeing is actually an increased interest in the higher apprenticeships and degree apprenticeships. So we're putting a lot of work into that, a lot of resource into that, and supporting that interest and that growing breadth of those, in fact. And of course, you know, what we're seeing, actually, we've seen a bit of an increase in this since COVID, the increase in number of students taking a gap year to really kind of work out what they want to go and do. You know, whether that's again to apply to university in a year's time, or again to move on to apprenticeships, but getting that year's experience of doing something different. So we're increasingly seeing that. We've talked a lot across this evening about the support systems, and you know, we've talked a lot about the personal progress mentors, so I won't talk about them any further, really, but there is also the welfare and skills team, who provide support for students with learning differences, and you know, looking at skills gaps that perhaps need to be filled. There's a great deal of support via the curriculum, so subject specific support via teachers, tutorial sessions, but also we have year 2 students acting as student mentors within subjects, providing really excellent support for our year 1 students. And you know, they're obviously a bit further down the line, gain that experience in year 1, and you know, are able to, you know, provide some wisdom that certainly the rest of us can't do. And as previously mentioned, we've got an excellent and very, you know, specialist careers team in place, providing that support for students and their next steps. You know, one of the key kind of messages we give to our students is, you know, this is a very quick 2 years, but they're going to change so much. It's not going to be easy, but ultimately, and of course, it will be worth it. So I'm going to hand over to our host, Andrew, and thank you so much.
Thank you to Rakesh, Howard and David. Really helpful to have that presentation. So thanks very much for joining us this evening, and have a good rest of the night.